The Veil did not send warnings. They did not broadcast ultimatums. They did not offer terms. In 300 years of expansion across 14 star systems, the Veil had never once opened a channel to say, "We are coming." They simply arrived. And what they found, they took. What resisted, they burned. What burned, they forgot about before the smoke had even cleared. It was not cruelty. Not exactly. The Veil were not cruel the way a child pulling wings off a fly is cruel. They were indifferent. The galaxy was a house, and they were moving through it room by room, and the things that lived in those rooms were furniture to be rearranged, or firewood to be stacked, depending on usefulness. They had never lost a war. Not one. Not a skirmish. Not a rearguard action. Not even a single engagement where the outcome had been in serious doubt for more than a few hours. The Veil Armada moved like a geological event. You did not fight a glacier. You got out of its way, or you became part of the landscape it left behind. The Chorus, the loose alliance of 16 alien species that shared the mid-rim of the Orion Spur, had learned this over decades of watching their neighbors disappear. The Dranathi had tried diplomacy. The Dranathi were now a labor caste. The Solvari had built the most advanced defensive network in the known galaxy, a web of orbital fortresses and missile platforms that stretched across 4 systems. The Veil had taken 11 days to dismantle it. The Solvari were now a labor caste too, working alongside the Dranathi, building more Veil ships in the shadow of their own destroyed stations. The Chorus watched, and the Chorus calculated, and the Chorus concluded, with the cold logic of people who have run the numbers and do not like what the numbers say, that there was no military option. The Veil were bigger. The Veil were faster. The Veil had been doing this for 3 centuries, and they were very, very good at it. There was, however, one option the Chorus had not yet tried. They had not tried the humans. Ambassador Thessaly Oren arrived at the Chorus Council chambers on Vithara Station, looking like she had slept on a transport for 11 hours, which she had. She was a small woman with sharp eyes, and the particular kind of tired that comes not from lack of sleep, but from having the same argument too many times. She set her datapad on the table, pulled up her files, and looked around the room at the 17 representatives watching her, with expressions ranging from polite skepticism to naked desperation. "You want to know if humanity will fight," she said. "We want to know," said High Speaker Merrick of the Chorus, a tall, gray-skinned Vetharan whose 4 eyes blinked in slow sequence. "If humanity can fight, against the Veil specifically. We have reviewed your species' military history. It is significant in volume. We've had a few wars, 437 documented armed conflicts in 6,000 years of recorded history," said the Vetheran. "Before you achieved interstellar travel. After, the number becomes difficult to track because your people were fighting in multiple systems simultaneously." Thessaly nodded slowly. "We're enthusiastic." "The Veil have never been stopped," said the representative from the Cathosi Collective, a being that resembled a very large and anxious moth. "In 3 centuries, not once. You understand this? Not a single engagement where they did not ultimately prevail." "I understand. And you are still willing to commit forces?" Thessaly looked down at her datapad. Then she looked back up. "High Speaker, can I ask you something? When the Veil attacked the Solvari network, the one that took them 11 days to dismantle, how long did the Solvari think it would hold?" Merrick's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Estimates at the time suggested, indefinitely. The network was genuinely exceptional. The finest defensive construction our alliance had ever seen. 11 days, Thessaly said again. "That's interesting." She tapped something on her datapad. "Because humanity has been at war, off and on, for most of its existence. We're very practiced at the specific skill of continuing to fight after we've already lost. We're not actually very good at winning quickly. We're extraordinarily good at winning eventually." The moth being's wings rustled. "Eventually. Against the Veil. This is your pitch." "No," Thessaly said. "This is my context. My pitch is simpler." She closed the datapad. "Tell us where they're going next. And get out of the way." The Veil's next target was Kareth Prime. It was not a strategically vital system by Veil standards. Kareth Prime's population of roughly 400 million Karathi were not a military power. They had a small orbital defense force, a few antiquated warships, and a tradition of elaborate ceremonial body paint that had no tactical value whatsoever. The Veil wanted Kareth Prime because it sat at the intersection of 3 supply lanes, and controlling it would make the next 7 systems significantly easier to absorb. The Karathi knew this. They had been watching the Veil advance for 2 years with the particular horror of people who can see exactly what is coming, and have been told, clearly and without ambiguity, that nothing can stop it. They had evacuated what civilians they could. They had put their defense force on full alert. They had, in a gesture that mixed ceremony with practicality, painted their warships in traditional Karathi battle colors, which were a deep arterial red. Then, 6 days before the Veil fleet was projected to arrive, something else arrived first. It came out of FTL alone. 1 ship. The Karathi defense commander, a female Karathi named Sath who had been in uniform for 30 years and had never fired a weapon in actual combat, stared at the ship on her display screen for a long time before she spoke. "Is that a human vessel?" Her sensor officer confirmed that it was. "1 ship," she said. "Yes, Commander. They sent 1 ship. Commander, I am reading significant energy signatures. The vessel is large." Large was doing a lot of work. The UES Harbinger was 900 meters long. It was not the biggest ship humanity had ever built. It was not the newest. It had been commissioned 43 years ago, had fought in 3 separate interstellar conflicts, had been retired twice, and unretired twice, and currently had a hole in its port rear hull section that maintenance had been meaning to get to for 8 months. Its paint was worn in long, pale streaks along the bow where micrometeorite abrasion had taken it down to bare metal. Its hull plating had been replaced in sections so many times that it resembled, from certain angles, a patchwork quilt assembled by someone who had access to only 1 color of thread. It was, in the assessment of everyone who looked at it for the first time, a very old ship that had been through a great deal. Commander Sath stared at it. "Hail them," she said. The channel opened. On screen appeared a woman in a dark gray uniform with close-cut silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved by someone who had heard about human expressions, but was working mostly from descriptions. Behind her, visible through the bridge viewports, stars moved slowly as the ship adjusted its heading. "Commander Sath," the woman said, "I'm Captain Alara Voss, UES Harbinger. We've been assigned to assist with the defense of Kareth Prime." "Captain," Sath said carefully, "you are 1 ship." "That's correct." Sath looked at her tactical officer. Her tactical officer looked back at her with the expression of someone who has been asked to confirm something they do not particularly want to confirm. "The projected Veil fleet," Sath said, "consists of 43 vessels, including 8 capital ships." "I know," said Captain Voss. "You are 1 ship," Sath said again, because it seemed important to say it again. Voss had the look of someone who had heard this observation several times already, and had made a private decision about how many more times she was willing to hear it before she stopped being polite about it. "Commander, I understand your concern. I'd like to request permission to take up a position at the outer marker of your defense perimeter. We're going to need about 4 hours to run some prep." "Prep," Sath said. "For the battle!" Commander Sath looked at the Harbinger on her screen. She looked at the red sweep of her tactical display where, in 6 days, 43 Veil ships would appear. She looked back at the Harbinger. "Permission granted," she said. It seemed like the least absurd response available. The Harbinger's crew numbered 812. Most of them had been with the ship for at least 3 years. Some had been on her for 15. There was a particular kind of relationship that develops between people and a machine when the machine has kept them alive long enough, the way you trust a car that has never broken down, not because you've inspected the engine, but because it's earned the trust by simply continuing to run. The Harbinger had that quality. It creaked in ways that sounded alarming and meant nothing. Its drives had a particular harmonic at high output that newer crew members always came to the bridge about the first time they heard it, and older crew members always told them it was fine, and it always was. Captain Alara Voss had commanded the Harbinger for 9 years. Before that, she had commanded a frigate, a destroyer, and briefly and unwillingly, a diplomatic escort vessel that she had gotten herself reassigned off of, inside of 6 weeks, by being comprehensively unsuited to diplomatic work. She was not a warm person. She was not a cold person either. She was precise in the way that a tool is precise, not because it tries to be, but because it was made for a specific purpose, and has been used for that purpose long enough that all the unnecessary parts have worn away. She was standing at the tactical table on the bridge 4 hours before the Veil were projected to arrive, looking at a display showing 43 ship signatures moving through the approach corridor at standard Veil invasion speed, which was unhurried, because the Veil had never needed to hurry. "They haven't changed formation," said Lieutenant Commander Yusuf Park, her executive officer. He was younger than her by 15 years, and had a habit of stating obvious things in a tone that made them sound like questions he was asking himself. "They wouldn't," Voss said. "Why would they? One ship waiting for them. They've never faced a situation where they needed to change formation for one ship." She moved a marker on the display, "which is useful." Park looked at the marker. "You want to put us here? That's inside the debris field." "Yes. The debris field from the old Karathi mining operation. The one with the gravitational anomalies." "Yes." "Their targeting systems will have trouble in there." "Yes." Park looked at the display for a moment. "And our targeting systems? Will also have trouble." Voss moved another marker. "Which is why we're going to fire before we go in." Park nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they understand what is being said, but are still processing the part about whether they are going to survive it. "Captain," he said, 43 ships. I know. 8 capital ships. I know. We're one ship." Voss looked at him. It was not an unkind look. It was the look of a person who has heard something and considered it and found it wanting. "Yusuf," she said, "have you read the Veil's battle doctrine?" "Standard, it's perfect," she said. "That's what's interesting about it. In 300 years, they've developed a doctrine that works against everything they've ever faced. Every alien military that went up against them fought the way they were designed to fight. Defensive lines, concentration of force, fall back when pressured, reinforce, hold." She looked back at the display. "They've never faced something that just keeps coming." Park was quiet for a moment. "We're one ship," he said. One more time. Quietly, this time. Not an argument, just a fact he was trying to make peace with. "Yes," Voss said, "but we're one human ship." She straightened up. "That's different." 6 hours later, the Veil fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Karath system and began its approach. On the bridge of the Veil command vessel, Fleet Commander Athan reviewed the sensor data with the particular boredom of competence. 43 ships, the Karathi Defense Force, 12 vessels, old, underarmed, and one anomaly. One additional contact, positioned at the outer marker of the Karathi perimeter, large vessel, unknown configuration, unusual energy signature. Athan looked at his tactical officer. "Species?" The officer ran the scan. "Human, Fleet Commander." Athan looked at the contact for a moment. He had heard of humans. Every species in the mid-rim had heard of humans in the past year. There was a great deal of discussion in the intelligence briefings about humanity's military history, about their adaptability, about various qualities that the briefings described with a kind of reluctant respect. One ship. Athan had 43. "Maintain approach," he said. "Standard formation." Why would he change anything? He had never needed to. He had never, in 20 years of commanding Veil fleets, lost a single ship in combat. Not one. The Veil Armada did not lose ships. It was not how things went. The Harbinger on his display was a single white point in the black, sitting very still, waiting. Athan watched it the way you watch a strange animal you've never seen before. Curious, not concerned. The curiosity of a man who has won every hand he has ever been dealt, and finds the novelty of a new card mildly interesting. "Distance to engagement range?" he asked. 4 hours, Fleet Commander." "Good," he said. He turned away from the display. He did not look at the Harbinger again for 3 hours and 40 minutes. When he did look at it again, it had not moved. It was still waiting. Still just sitting there. Something about that bothered him in a way he could not immediately name. In the Karathi Command Center, Commander Sath had been watching the Harbinger as much as she had been watching the Vale fleet. The human ship had not moved since it took up its position. It had not hailed them. It had not asked for anything. It was just there, at the outer edge of the field, dark and still and very, very large. Her communications officer turned. "Commander, the Harbinger is transmitting." "Open it." Captain Voss's voice came through without video. She sounded like a person reading off a list she has reviewed enough times to have memorized it, but still reads off because the list is the correct procedure. "Commander Sath, Vale Fleet will reach engagement range in approximately 22 minutes. I'd recommend pulling your defense force back to the second orbital marker and holding there." The Sath straightened. "Captain, those are my ships and my system. We will stand and—" "Your ships will be destroyed in the first exchange," Voss said, with no particular inflection. "I am not saying this as an insult. I am saying it because it's true, and because dead ships don't help anyone. Pull back to the second marker. Let us engage first. If we go down, join the fight. If we don't go down," and there was something in that pause, something dry and minimal that was, Sath realized, humor, "then you'll have a better idea of what you're working with." The channel closed. Commander Sath looked at her tactical display, at the 43 Vale ships, at the one human ship. She ordered her fleet back to the second orbital marker. 22 minutes later, the Vale fleet reached engagement range, and the Harbinger fired first. The Harbinger fired first, and it fired everything. Not in sequence, not in careful, measured salvos the way military doctrine across most of the known galaxy recommended, spreading fire across multiple targets to test defenses, probe shield strengths, gather data before committing to a line of attack. That was how you fought when you were cautious. That was how you fought when losing a ship was an unacceptable outcome, and so you treated your ammunition like currency and spent it carefully. Harbinger fired like it had already spent the currency and was working on credit. All 12 primary railgun batteries opened up simultaneously. Both mass driver arrays, the forward torpedo banks, all 6 of them, launched full spreads, and then, before the first rounds had even crossed half the distance to the Vale formation, the Harbinger's drives lit up at full military power, and it moved. Not away, not sideways, but straight in, accelerating toward 43 enemy ships at a speed that made Commander Sath's tactical officer physically flinch back from his console. On the Vale command ship, Fleet Commander Athan had exactly 3 seconds between when his sensors registered what was happening and when the first rounds reached his fleet. 3 seconds. In his 20 years of fleet command, enemy fire had always given him more time than that. You saw it coming. You had time to assess, adjust, order countermeasures. The first exchange was always a kind of conversation. "Here is what we can do. Here is what you can do. Now let us work out where this is going." The Harbinger was not interested in a conversation. The first railgun rounds hit the lead Vale capital ship before its shields had fully cycled to combat configuration. The Vale shield systems were excellent, layered, fast, adaptive. They were designed to absorb the kind of firepower that a ship the size of the Harbinger should, by any reasonable calculation, be capable of producing. They had not been designed to absorb the kind of firepower the Harbinger actually produced. The lead capital ship's forward shields took 4 hits in 0.8 seconds and collapsed. The next 3 hits went through the bare hull. 2 of them went all the way through and came out the other side. The capital ship broke apart in a way that looked, on the tactical displays of every observer in the system, genuinely unexpected. Not because the Harbinger's weapons were exotic or impossible. They were rail-launched kinetic rounds and old-model torpedoes, nothing that wasn't in every military database in the chorus. It was the volume, the sheer sustained volume of it, delivered at that speed, from that range, in that first 3-second window before anyone had properly registered that the engagement had started. The Vale fleet scattered. For the first time in 300 years, a Vale fleet scattered. Not a retreat, not a tactical reposition. A scatter, ships breaking in multiple directions without a coordinated order, because the individual commanders of those ships experienced something their training had never quite prepared them for, which was the specific variety of alarm that comes from watching a thing you were told was impossible happen in front of you in real time. Ethan's hands were on his console. His voice was steady because he was a professional, and 20 years of command had built steadiness into him like rebar in concrete. "Reform," he said. "Reform and return fire. Target the human vessel. Full engagement." His fleet reformed. They were good. They were very good. The scatter lasted less than 40 seconds before Veil discipline reasserted itself, ships swinging back into formation, weapon systems locking onto the Harbinger. As it continued to close at full acceleration, 42 ships, one capital ship gone in the first exchange, a loss so unprecedented that several Veil commanders would later report having assumed their sensors were malfunctioning, bringing weapons to bear on one target. They fired. On the Harbinger's bridge, the impacts registered as sound as much as sensation. The ship groaned. Not a metaphor, an actual, structural, deep metal groan that started somewhere in the forward hull and traveled through the deck plating under everyone's feet like a slow wave. The lights dropped to emergency red for 2 seconds and came back to full. Something in the port section made a noise that Lieutenant Commander Park had never heard a ship make before, and he had been on ships during bad moments. "Shield status," Voss said. "Port shields at 61%, said the shield officer. "Starboard at 78, forward at..." A second impact, harder. The ship swung 3 degrees off, heading before the navigation systems corrected. "Forward at 44% and dropping. Compensate to starboard, reduce forward profile." Voss was at the tactical table, her hands moving across it with the calm of a person doing something they have rehearsed many times. "Battery status. All primaries firing. Railguns 4 and 7 are loading slow. Thermal issue. Torpedo banks 1 through 4 reloaded. 5 and 6 in 20 seconds. What's our range now? 60,000 kilometers and closing." She looked up. Through the forward viewport, the Veil fleet was visible to the naked eye now, as points of light that strobed and pulsed as they fired. It was, objectively, a remarkable sight. It was also a significant amount of incoming fire. "They're concentrating on us," Park said. He was watching his display. The targeting data was clear. Every Veil ship in the formation had fixed on the Harbinger. Not a single weapon was directed at the Karathi Defense Force, which had, per Voss's instruction, pulled back to the second orbital marker and was watching the engagement with the kind of attention you give to something you cannot fully believe is happening. "Good," Voss said. Park looked at her. "Good. They're not shooting at anything else." She moved a marker on the tactical display. "All weapons on a single target. That's not doctrine. That's panic management. They're trying to remove the problem." She looked up. "We're the problem. While they're solving us, they're not doing anything else. We need to not get killed while they solve us." "That's correct." She looked back at the display. "Take us into the debris field. Now." The Harbinger turned. It was not a graceful turn. A 900-meter warship at full military acceleration does not turn the way a fighter does. It turns the way a large building would turn if large buildings could turn. All mass and momentum. The drives working against their own previous output to drag the heading around. The hull groaned again during the turn. The lights flickered. They went into the debris field. The debris field was the remnant of a Karathi mining operation that had been abandoned 60 years ago. A sprawl of processed rock fragments and dead equipment, and dust clouds that stretched across roughly 40,000 kilometers of space between the outer and middle orbital markers. In clear space, Veil targeting systems were precise enough to hit a 1-meter target at extreme range. In the debris field, the dust and the metal, and the gravitational distortions from the field's irregular mass distribution turned targeting from a precision exercise into an educated guess. The Veil fleet slowed at the edge of the field. Ethan watched his sensor picture dissolve into noise. The Harbinger was in there somewhere. He could see its drive signature flickering through the interference, could track its rough position, could not get a targeting solution precise enough to commit to a full salvo. "They're hiding," said his tactical officer. "They're maneuvering," Ethan said, because there was a difference, and it mattered. Hiding was passive. Maneuvering was purposeful. The Harbinger was doing something in there, not just running. He was right. The Harbinger had stopped firing from the moment it entered the debris field. Not because it couldn't, because Voss had given a specific order. All weapons hold. No fire. Minimum drive output. Passive only. The crew waited. 812 people in various compartments and stations throughout the ship, all of them in the dark. Emergency lighting only, to reduce the thermal signature. All of them listening to the sounds the ship made. The tick and pop of hull plating cooling after the salvo, the low hum of the passive sensor array, the occasional distant impact of a debris fragment against the hull that made the newer crew members tighten their grip on whatever they were holding. Park stood beside Voss at the tactical table. "They've stopped at the field edge," he said quietly, looking at the passive returns. 42 ships, holding position. They're waiting for us to come out, or to move enough to get a fix. Same thing. Voss was looking at the display, not at the Vale fleet, but at the debris field itself, the map of it, the density readings, the gravitational contours. How long before they decide to come in after us? Park thought about it. If I were commanding them, I'd come in after about 10 minutes. You don't let a damaged enemy ship regroup and cover. You wouldn't. I wouldn't. The Vale haven't done it before. Voss tapped the display. Their doctrine assumes they'll have sensor dominance. Everything they do flows from that. Clear targets, clear solutions, clear outcomes. In here, they're blind. So they wait. They wait. Which means, she said, we don't have to fight 42 ships. We fight whatever they send in to look for us. Park stared at the display, then at the captain. You want to pick them off in the dark. We know this field. We mapped it on the way in. They don't. She looked up. We're going to be very quiet and very patient. And when they send scouts, we're going to make the scouts disappear. And every ship that disappears in here is a data point telling their commander that his doctrine doesn't work in this situation. And if he decides to just saturate the field with fire, full spread, everything they have, just blanket it. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then we find out how fast we can move, she said. It was not a fully satisfying answer. Park had learned, over 4 years of serving under Voss, that when she gave an answer like that, technically true, leaving a significant amount unaddressed, it was because the gap in the answer was filled by something she had calculated and chosen not to say, because saying it would take time they didn't have, or morale they couldn't afford to spend. He had also learned that she was usually right, which helped. Weapons ready, she said. Passive tracking only. Don't breathe hard. Ethan waited 7 minutes before he sent scouts. 2 light cruisers, faster and smaller than his capital ships, sent into the debris field in a wide pincer pattern to triangulate the Harbinger's position. It was sound doctrine. It was exactly what you would do. Get eyes in the field, get a fix, report back, and then you could either commit to a field engagement or simply pour enough fire into the area to make it untenable. The 2 cruisers went in. 4 minutes later, one of them came back out, moving fast, on an irregular heading that suggested the navigation officer was doing something other than following a planned course. The other cruiser did not come back. There was no debris cloud where it had been, no explosion bloom on the sensor returns. It was simply gone, reduced from a contact on the display to an absence, the way a word vanishes when you look too long at it, and it stops looking like a word. On the surviving cruiser, the commander was reporting in a voice that was audibly not steady. The Harbinger had been completely invisible until it was 200 meters away. At 200 meters, the Harbinger had fired 1 shot. 1 torpedo, close range, direct hit. Shields insufficient at that range. Cruiser gone before the debris settled. The Harbinger had then vanished back into the field before the surviving cruiser could get a targeting solution. Ethan listened to the report. He had 41 ships. He had started with 43. In all his 20 years of fleet command, he had started battles with fleets and ended them with fleets. Sometimes the enemy surrendered early. Sometimes they fought hard before surrender. Once, in the Solvari campaign, a defense platform had managed to damage a destroyer badly enough to require dry dock time. That had been significant enough to be in his official record. He had lost 2 ships in the last. He checked the time. 40 minutes. That was not right. That was not how things went. He looked at his tactical officer. Options, he said. The officer presented 4. Saturate the debris field with full fleet fire. Enter the field in force. Maintain blockade at field edge and wait, or withdraw and call for reinforcement. 4 options. Withdraw was on the list. In 300 years of Vale military history, no fleet commander had ever had to seriously consider the withdraw option. It was there in the doctrine the way fire exits are in a building, required by regulation, never actually used, present only as acknowledgement that certain theoretical situations might theoretically arise. Ethan stared at his display for a long time. Harbinger. Did not move. It was in there somewhere, waiting. He thought about what the intelligence briefings had said about humans, the volume of their military history, the specific skill of continuing to fight after losing, the word the human ambassador had used. Eventually, he chose option 1, full fleet saturation of the debris field, because he had 41 ships, and they had 1, and whatever their other qualities, physics still applied. Enough fire into a finite space, and you hit everything in it. He gave the order. On the Harbinger. Every passive sensor lit up at once. The fire coming in was extraordinary. It was like watching a storm arrive. Not discrete weapons fire from discrete ships, but a continuous torrent, overlapping and layered, turning the debris field from a maze into a furnace. Rock fragments vaporized. Chunks of ancient mining equipment superheated and exploded. The dust clouds became plasma. Voss watched the sensor display and saw the fire pattern, and in 3 seconds understood it, and in 4 seconds was already moving. Full drives, she said. Heading 270, elevation plus 40. Now. The Harbinger. Moved. Not fast enough. Nothing is fast enough to dodge 41 ships firing simultaneously into a space you are occupying. 3 hits in the first 8 seconds. The ship bucked and rang like a bell. 2 more hits. Something in the rear section let go with a sound like a controlled demolition. Emergency seals throughout the port-aft quadrant. 3 compartments vented. The crew in those compartments had time to evacuate, because evacuation drills on the Harbinger happened every 48 hours, and the crew had them memorized, the way you memorize breathing. But the dudes. Harbinger was moving, and moving changed the geometry, and changed geometry meant the fire pattern that had been optimal when the ship was at one position was now slightly wrong for its new position, and slightly wrong meant the targeting computers needed to adjust, and while they adjusted there was a gap. Voss drove for the gap. The Harbinger broke out of the debris field on the far side, the opposite side from the Vale fleet, trailing atmosphere from 3 hull breaches, and leaving a streak of ionized gas behind it like a scar on the dark. It was still moving. Its weapons were still active. On the Vale tactical display, it reappeared as a contact at maximum range, on the far side of the debris field, damaged, trailing gas, drives at high output, moving away. For exactly 47 seconds, it looked like the Harbinger was running. Then it turned around. It turned around, and it was still firing, and it came back. Fleet Commander Ethan looked at his display. He looked at the single contact, damaged, trailing gas, turning back toward 41 warships. For the first time in 20 years of fleet command, he felt something cold move through him. Not fear. He told himself it was not fear. It was the cold of simple recognition, the recognition of something that does not follow the patterns you have learned, the thing that the patterns did not prepare you for. One human ship. Coming back. Still coming back. All weapons, he said. His voice was steady. Barely. Maximum fire. Kill that ship. Harbinger. Should have died. That is the only honest way to say it. By every calculation available to every tactical system in the Vale fleet, by every model of weapons yield and shield capacity and hull integrity that Vale military science had refined over 300 years of active warfare, the Harbinger should have come apart somewhere in the first 10 seconds of maximum fleet fire. It did not come apart. It absorbed. It took hit after hit, each one loud enough that people on the lower decks felt them in their teeth, and it kept its heading, and it kept its drives burning, and it kept coming. Hull plating buckled in long seams along the starboard side, and the emergency system sealed behind it. Deck 7 lost pressure, and then Deck 8, and the crew in those sections moved up and kept working. A railgun battery on the dorsal mount took a direct hit that melted the barrel housing, and the crew chief rerouted targeting to the secondary mount in 40 seconds. Because they had practiced the reroute so many times, the movements were in their hands without thought. Captain Voss stood at the tactical table and did not grip it for balance, though the deck was moving under her in ways that made balance a negotiation. She watched her display. She watched the veil formation. She watched the fire coming in, and she watched the gaps in that fire, the way a person crossing a fast river watches the stones. Not the water, not the danger, just the next place to step. Battery 2, shift targeting to the cruiser formation, on the left flank, she said. Don't touch the capital ships yet. Park looked at her from his station. He had a cut above his left eye from when his console had thrown a fragment during a nearby impact. He had not done anything about it. You want to leave the capital ships? They're what he's protecting. Their fire is covering a defensive formation. Look at the spacing. She tapped the display. He's scared of us hitting the capitals. That's where the command structure lives. If I go for the capitals directly, he concentrates everything on stopping us. But if I take the flanks, another impact. Massive. The ship lurched hard to port, and the lights died completely for 4 seconds. Full dark. And in the dark you could hear the Harbinger, making sounds that no one had ever heard it make before. Deep structural sounds, the sounds of metal being asked to do more than metal wants to do. The lights came back. If I take the flanks, Voss continued, as if the dark had not happened, his formation has to open up. And when it opens up, we go through the middle. Park stared at her, through the middle of 41 ships. 39 now. She gestured at the display, where 2 more Veil cruiser contacts had gone dark in the last exchange. 38. Look. Another contact vanished. Battery 2 had found the cruiser formation on the left flank, and the cruiser formation had not been expecting sustained focused fire from a ship that, according to all available intelligence, should have been a debris field by now. Shield status, Voss said. The shield officer's voice was the specific flat calm of someone who has delivered bad news enough times that they have stopped dressing it up. Forward shields gone. Port shields gone. Starboard at 11%. Aft at 33. Hull? 17 confirmed breaches. Emergency sealed. Deck 7 through 10 port side are vented. Structural integrity in the forward section is... A pause. Captain, the forward section is not doing well. Is the ship flying? Yes. Are the guns firing? Yes. Then the ship is fine, she turned back to the display. Prepare to execute the through-the-middle approach on my mark. Full military power. Everything we have, forward and to both flanks simultaneously. We're not going to be in there long enough for it to matter that we're down on shields. Park came to stand beside her. He lowered his voice, not because there was anyone nearby who shouldn't hear, because some things feel like they should be said quietly. Elara, if we go through the middle of their formation and take fire from both sides at point blank, the Harbinger is 900 meters long, Voss said. She's old and she's ugly, and she's held together in places with decisions maintenance made 8 months ago that I pretended not to know about, but she was built to take punishment. She was built to keep fighting after she should have stopped. She looked at him. So were we. Park looked back at her for a moment. Then he nodded and went back to his station. The Harbinger flew at 38 ships and did not slow down. On the Karathi command station, Commander Sath had stopped trying to analyze what she was watching and had started simply watching it. Her tactical officer had long since given up giving her updates. The numbers changed too fast. Veil contacts were dropping off the display at a rate that made the numbers meaningless. You'd say a number, and by the time the sound reached the captain's ears, it would already be wrong. So they watched in silence, the entire command staff, in a room designed for orderly military procedure. watching the most disorderly military engagement any of them had ever seen. Harbinger went through the middle of the Veil formation, at full military power, into the gap she had opened up by hitting the flanks. She went through the middle at a speed that the Veil ships in the center of the formation could not fully compensate for. Because you can track a target, you can lead a target, but when a 900-meter warship is closing at full military power and firing in every direction simultaneously, the geometry becomes very complicated very fast. She took fire from both sides as she went through. The hits were visible on the tactical display as contact flickers, each one an impact that would have been critical against a lesser ship, or a ship that was not already so committed to its heading that there was nothing to do but go forward. She fired as she went, point-blank range, railgun rounds that crossed less than a kilometer before they hit, torpedoes with barely enough distance to arm. She came out the other side of the Veil formation. She was still there, smaller, on the sensor return. A smaller drive signature. One main drive had gone out during the pass. She was trailing more than just atmosphere now. Debris, hull fragments, a long, slow spiral of something that might have been coolant. But she was there. She turned again. Sath's communications officer turned to her, and his voice had the stunned quality of a person saying something their brain has not yet fully accepted. "Commander, Veil fleet has broken off." Sath looked at the display. The Veil fleet contacts were moving, not toward the Harbinger, not toward Kareth Prime, away. "They're retreating?" she said. "Yes, Commander." Sath looked at the display for a long time. 22 of the original 43 contacts remained. 22 ships retreating from one. One human ship, trailing debris and atmosphere, down to one main drive, shields gone, hull breached in more places than the damage report could currently count. Still there. "Hail the Harbinger," she said. It took 3 attempts to get a signal through. The Harbinger's communications array had taken damage in the pass, and whatever was left was operating at partial capacity. When Voss finally appeared on screen, the image was grainy, striped with static, and the audio had a quality like it was being transmitted through something that had been partially melted, which it had. She looked the same. That was the thing that struck Sath most, in the way that strange details lodge in your memory during significant moments. The same close-cut silver hair, the same expression that was not warm and not cold. She looked like someone who had been through something difficult and had not yet decided what to do with the information. Behind her, the Harbinger's bridge was visibly different from the first time they had spoken. Emergency lighting only. A section of the overhead had come down in the far corner, and someone had put a tarp over it, which was a response so practical and so insufficient that Sath felt something that was not quite amusement and not quite grief. Crew members moved in the background doing things with purpose and speed. "Captain Voss," Sath said, "the Veil fleet is retreating." "I see that. You need medical assistance, engineering support? We can. We're managing." A pause. Something happened off-screen that Voss glanced at, then looked back. "What's your casualty status on the defense force?" Sath blinked. We didn't engage. Per your instructions, we held at the second marker." "Good." Something that might have been relief crossed Voss's face for a fraction of a second before it was gone. "We have injured. I'll send a list if you have medical facilities available." "Of course, Captain. What you just did. I have been in military service for 30 years. I have never—" Sath stopped. Found words inadequate. Tried again. "How many crew did you lose?" Voss was quiet for a moment. The static filled the silence. 14, she said. "Confirmed. We're still accounting for some sections." 14. In an engagement where she had faced 43 ships. Sath did the math, and the math was not real. It was not a number that fit inside what she had just watched. "I'm sorry," Sath said, and meant it in the way you mean something when the words are too small for what you feel, and you say them anyway, because silence is worse. "So am I," Voss said, simply, without performance. Another pause. Then Voss said something that Sath would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. "Commander, I'd recommend alerting your neighboring systems. The Veil are going to report back, and what they report is going to be New information for them. They'll need time to process it. That buys you some days, maybe more. She looked off screen again. I'll need to get the ship to a dock. She's not pretty right now. She was never pretty, Sath said, and then was surprised to hear herself say it. Something moved across Voss's face that might, in other circumstances, have been called a smile. No, she agreed, but she's still flying. The channel closed. Fleet Commander Athen's report reached Vale High Command 9 hours after the retreat. It was not the kind of report Vale fleet commanders sent. There was a format for after-action reports, a structure developed over 3 centuries of consistent victory, and the structure assumed certain things. Engagement initiated, engagement prosecuted, outcome favorable. It did not have a section for what Athen had to report. He wrote it anyway. He reported the engagement of 1 human vessel against a fleet of 43. He reported the loss of 21 ships, destroyed or too damaged for continued service. He reported the human vessel surviving. He reported the retreat. He used the word retreat. He wrote it in the formal report with the official designation and his seal, and he knew what it meant, what it would mean when it arrived, what the people reading it would feel when they saw that word in that place where it had never appeared before. He wrote it anyway, because it was true, and because the alternative was lying in his official record, and he was not willing to do that. He added a tactical assessment. He had been thinking about it for 9 hours, and the assessment had not changed, had in fact solidified into something he was now certain of, the way you become certain of things, when you have had time and distance, and the particular clarity of having been very wrong. The assessment said, the human vessel did not fight to win, it fought to not stop. These are different objectives, and Vale doctrine is not designed to counter the second one. A force fighting to win can be defeated. A force fighting to not stop can only be exhausted, and the engagement data suggests that exhausting a human military force within a single battle may not be a realistic goal. He added a recommendation. The recommendation said, we need more information about humans before we engage again. He sent the report. Then he sat in his command chair for a long time, in the quiet of a ship moving at standard transit speed through empty space, and he thought about the Harbinger. Turning around, the damage it had taken before that turn, the drives on the display, the way it had come back. He thought about the human concept he had read about in the intelligence briefings, the one that had seemed, at the time, like a cultural curiosity rather than a military consideration. They don't stop. He had read it. He had filed it. He had not. He understood now, believed it. Not really, because he had not had a referent for it. He had read the words, and his mind had put them next to every other enemy he had faced, and noted them and moved on, because every enemy he had ever faced had eventually stopped. He had a referent now. He sat with it. In the mid-rim, in the chorus council chambers on Vathara Station, Ambassador Thessaly Oren received the battle report from Kareth Prime and read it twice. Then she forwarded it to the council with a note that said simply, as discussed. High Speaker Merrick called her within the hour. His 4 eyes were doing something she had not seen them do before, blinking out of sequence, which in Vatharans indicated a state of significant cognitive processing, something between excitement and the specific unsettledness of having a fundamental assumption revised. 1 ship, he said. Yes. 21 Vale ships destroyed or disabled, the fleet retreated. Yes. 1 human ship. High Speaker, I heard you the first time. His eyes blinked, out of sequence again. Ambassador, your government, how many ships do they have? Thessaly set down her datapad, looked at him. That, she said, is a much more interesting question. Merrick looked at her for a long moment. You said, when you came here, you said get out of the way. I did. And your species. You are prepared to. How many systems are currently under Vale Advance?
7.
And you are prepared to. High Speaker, Thessaly said, and her voice had a quality he had not heard in it before. Something underneath the tired and the professional. Something old and certain, and maybe not entirely comfortable to be near. We have been waiting for a fight worth having for a while now. She picked up her datapad. I'll draft the formal request for Allied support and have it to you by morning. In the meantime, I'd start telling your member species to hold their positions. She stood up to leave. Ambassador, Merrick's voice stopped her. The Harbinger. It survived. It did. How? Thessaly thought about it. About the right way to explain something that wasn't, in her experience, fully explainable to people who hadn't lived it. About the history of it, 6,000 years of humans fighting each other, fighting everything, losing and getting up and losing again and getting up again, until getting up was so deep in the reflex it wasn't a decision anymore. Because we built it to, she said, and because the people on it were human. She paused at the door. Those are the same answer. She left. High Speaker Merrick sat alone in his chambers and looked at the battle data from Kareth Prime for a very long time. 43 ships. One came back. And it was the wrong one. The Veil took 41 days to respond. 41 days of silence across every system they had touched, every frontier they had pressed against, every neighbor who had been watching their slow advance the way you watch a tide come in when you have nowhere higher to stand. 41 days where nothing moved and nothing happened, and the chorus held its collective breath and tried to decide whether the stillness meant the Veil were finished, or whether it meant they were thinking. They were thinking. What came out of that thinking was not another fleet. What came out of that thinking was a document, 63 pages, transmitted simultaneously to every chorus member world, to human diplomatic channels, and to the independent systems that had been watching the Kareth engagement data on repeat for 6 weeks. The document was a formal military assessment, the first the Veil had ever publicly released in 300 years of expansion, and it said, in the careful language of military analysis, that the Veil had encountered an adversary whose tactical behavior fell outside the parameters of their existing engagement models, and that, pending development of revised doctrine, forward operations in the mid-rim were suspended. Suspended. Not ended. Suspended. Ambassador Thessaly Oren read the document in her office on Vithera Station, at 0300 station time, having been woken up by a communications officer who had read it first, and decided it was the kind of thing that required waking the ambassador. She read it twice. She made a cup of something hot and read it a third time. Then she sent 2 messages. The first went to the Chorus Council. They're afraid. This is the window. Recommend immediate activation of all commitments. The second went to Earth, to the office of the Joint Military Command, and it said, They've blinked. How fast can you move? The response from Joint Military Command came back in 4 hours. It was 3 words. Already on the way. Life, the UES, Harbinger, had been in dry dock at Kareth Station for 38 days when the orders came through. She did not look like herself. Dry dock does that to ships, strips away the context of space and motion, and turns them into construction problems, which is what they are, but not what they feel like when they're flying. Her hull was open in a dozen places, where repair crews worked around the clock in pressure suits, cutting away damaged plating and fitting new sections. The patchwork quality she had always had was more pronounced now, old gray and new bright silver, and the burnt-edge black of sections that hadn't been replaced yet. Captain Voss was standing on an observation platform looking at her when Lieutenant Commander Park came to find her. He was walking the way people walk when they have news they're not sure how to lead with, the slight hesitation in the step that precedes an announcement. They're sending a fleet, he said. Voss kept looking at the ship, at the repair crews, at the new hull sections catching the station's light. How many? 70 ships. Full carrier groups, 2 battleship divisions, screening elements. He came to stand beside her. They're already in transit. ETA to Kareth system. 16 days. 70 ships. In her entire career, Voss had never seen a human fleet of 70 ships assembled and sent to a single theater. It was the kind of force commitment that meant the people making decisions had looked at what she had done with one ship and reached a conclusion. What are our orders? She said. We're attached as flagship, command ship for the operation. Park paused. High Admiral Renata Chen is commanding the fleet. She wants us on point. Voss turned that over. Chen, she knew, had known for 20 years. Chen was the kind of officer who made decisions the way stone falls, not by trying, just by being what she was and going where gravity took her. She was also the kind of officer who would put the harbinger on point, not as a gesture, but because she had looked at the engagement data and concluded, correctly, that the harbinger had information no one else had about how the veil responded under specific pressure. When can she be ready to fly? Park asked. He meant the ship. Ask Chief Okafor. Park had already asked Chief Okafor. Chief Okafor, who was the harbinger's chief engineer and who had been living in the engine compartments for 38 days, and who had the particular hollow-eyed focus of a person who has been running on purpose rather than sleep, had said, 12 days if you don't touch anything I'm not finished with yet. That left 4 days of buffer before the fleet arrived. Tell her 12 days, Voss said. Park nodded. Then, because he was Park, and this was the thing he did, 70 ships against the Veil. Against whatever they're rebuilding and rethinking right now. Yes, that's a real war. It's been a real war, Voss said. We're just formally introducing ourselves. On the Veil homeworld of Aethris, in the deep council chambers where the High Command had met for 3 centuries, Fleet Commander Aethan was delivering a briefing that no Veil commander in history had ever delivered before. The chamber was designed for victory briefings. The architecture said so. High ceilings, long sightlines, the aesthetic vocabulary of a species that had built its self-understanding on the fact of its own dominance. The chamber did not have a word, in its design language, for what Aethan was currently describing. He described it anyway. The human vessel's primary tactical advantage was its willingness to absorb damage without altering its objective, he said. His voice was even. He had practiced being even about this. Standard engagement doctrine assumes that sufficient damage forces a behavioral change in the enemy. Retreat, defensive positioning, reduced aggression. The Harbinger did not behave this way. It took critical damage and continued its attack. It took damage that should have been mission-ending and continued its attack. The only conclusion consistent with the engagement data is that the human crew's decision threshold for withdrawal is significantly higher than any adversary we have previously encountered. One of the High Command Council, Senior Marshal Verath, leaned forward. He was very old and had the quality of old powerful people everywhere, which is a stillness that is not peace but compressed force. You are saying their pain tolerance is higher. I am saying their willingness to continue in the face of pain is higher. Those are different things. Aethan thought about how to say the next part. He had been thinking about how to say it for 41 days, and he still wasn't satisfied. Marshal, in all our campaigns, we have fought species that were brave, species that fought hard and died well. The humans did not fight like they were being brave. They fought like stopping was not a concept they had available to them. Silence in the chamber. There is also the matter of their numbers, said Second Marshal Kor. She was younger than Verath, and had the specific quality of someone who has looked at a problem clearly, and does not like what they see clearly. We have complete records on human military capacity. They are not a small species, and they have been at war with each other for the majority of their history. Yes, which means they have been continuously developing and refining military technology and doctrine for 6,000 years. Yes, against each other, against enemies who were also human, and therefore also, as you describe, unwilling to stop. A pause. Yes. Kor looked at the council. We have been fighting species who reached a certain level of development and then stopped developing because they had peace. The humans have been in an arms race with themselves for 6 millennia. She let that sit. We may have significantly underestimated them. Verath's voice was quiet. Fleet Commander, your recommendation. Aethan had been thinking about his recommendation for 41 days also. It was not a comfortable recommendation to make. It was not the kind of recommendation that had ever been made in this chamber. But he had the data, and the data said what it said. We need to know how many ships they're sending, he said, and we need to know it before they get here. The intelligence came back in 9 days. 70 ships. Human designation. First Expeditionary Force. Including designation classes that Veil Intelligence recognized from database records. Carrier class, Battleship class, Destroyer screen, and 1 designation that did not appear in any existing intelligence file. The class was listed as Titan. 2 ships of this class, Configuration unknown. Mass readings from the long-range scout that had gathered the data were, the intelligence officer used the word unusual, which was a word chosen to avoid saying impossible. In an official report, Ethan looked at the Titan-class readings for a long time. The Harbinger had been, by human classification standards, a mid-weight battleship, old, heavily armed, but mid-weight. These readings suggested something that made a mid-weight battleship look like an escort frigate. He requested more data. More data was not available. The scout that had gathered this data had not returned. Its last transmission had been the data packet, and then silence, which meant the human fleet's screening elements had found it and done something about it. And the something they had done about it had been fast enough that the scout had not had time to send another message. Fast screening elements. Titan-class ships, 70 vessels total. Ethan assembled what he had and brought it back to the High Command. Senior Marshal Verath looked at the Titan-class readings for a very long time. "How many ships can we field in the mid-rim theater within 20 days?" he asked. The answer was 130. Every available vessel from 3 patrol fleets, the reserve formation from the Dranathi sector, 2 carrier groups reassigned from the Eastern Expansion. 130 ships against 70. For the first time in 300 years, Ethan found himself calculating whether the numerical advantage was sufficient. Not whether they would win. He had never had to think about whether they would win, but whether the numbers were sufficient, given the specific quality of what they were facing. "Assemble them," Verath said. "Marshal," Ethan said, "there is one more piece of intelligence." He brought up the final item from the scout data. The human fleet is not traveling alone. Long-range data indicates they have Chorus allied ships in formation. 20 additional vessels, mixed species. Kethosi, Vetharan, and, he paused, Karathi. A short silence. "The Karathi have a military of 12 ships, Kor said. Old ships. We dismissed them." "They've been rebuilding for 38 days, Ethan said, "and they are not dismissed anymore." He looked at the display. "None of them are dismissed anymore. The humans did something at Karath Prime that we may not have fully accounted for in our assessment." Verath looked at him. "What?" "They showed everyone else that it can be done." Ethan looked at the fleet composition data, at the 90 vessels in total coming toward them, at the alliance that had not existed a year ago, species that had spent a decade watching their neighbors absorbed one by one, now flying in formation behind one battered human battleship. The Veil have never lost. We have spent 300 years making sure that was true, because the value of it is not just military. It is psychological. Every species that saw us coming knew we didn't lose, and they fought or surrendered, or ran inside that knowledge. He let that sit in the chamber for a moment. That knowledge is no longer accurate. The Harbinger left Karath Station 12 days after entering dry dock. She did not look new. She would never look new. The repair sections were bright against the older hull plating in the way that scar tissue is bright, different from the original, honest about what it replaced. Chief Okafor had gotten the second main drive back to 70% capacity and declared it, with the dark humor of a person who has stopped pretending things are fine and started finding the not fine things funny, good enough to get us killed. All shields were functional, all weapon systems operational. The forward hull was intact. She was not the same ship that had limped into Karath Station 38 days ago. She was something that had been broken and put back together, and the putting back together had been done by people who understood her, in the way you understand a thing you have lived inside for years. She flew out to meet the fleet. The fleet was already there when she arrived at the rally point. Voss had given herself one extra day and used it to make sure every department was actually ready, rather than paperwork ready. And the fleet had arrived while she was doing that. She brought the Harbinger in at standard approach speed and watched the fleet take shape on her tactical display, resolving from distant returns into individual vessels, into 70 human ships and 20 allied ships, arranged in the specific geometry of a force that has been organized to go somewhere and do something. She had seen human fleets before. Smaller ones, she had been part of them. She had not felt, before, Quite what she felt looking at this one. Park felt it too. She could tell by the way he stood at his station. Not the tense stillness of combat readiness, but something different. Something that was the body recognizing a context it was built for. High Admiral Chen's voice came through on the command channel. She sounded like herself, direct, unhurried, with the specific economy of someone who has decided what they are going to do and is allocating 0 words to anything that isn't that. Harbinger. Good to see you in one piece. More or less, Voss said. Intel puts the Veil at 130 ships, assembled at the Thessa waypoint, 12 hours from Kareth at standard transit. A pause. You've fought them. Anything I need to know that isn't in the report? Voss thought about it. They've never lost before, she said. At Kareth they lost, and they had to watch it happen, and it changed something. They're not the same enemy they were 6 weeks ago. They've had time to think. So have we, Chen said. Yes, but we've been thinking about how to fight them. They've been thinking about how to fight us. Those are different problems, and I don't know which one has the better answer yet. That's honest. It's what I have. A brief silence. Then Chen said, You held Kareth Prime with 1 ship. We held it long enough, Voss said. The ship held. That too. Chen's voice had something in it. Not quite warmth, not quite gravity. Somewhere between respect and the specific things soldiers feel toward other soldiers who have been somewhere hard. Take your position on point. When we move, you move first. Understood. One more thing, Alara. The use of her first name. Chen reserved it for when she meant something past the rank. They're going to come hard this time. They know what you are now. They're going to be trying to take you out specifically, fast, before you can do what you did at Kareth. Voss nodded, though Chen couldn't see it. I know. So stay alive. That's the plan. It's a good plan. A pause. It'd be a better plan with more specifics. Working on it, Voss said, and the channel clicked off, and the Harbinger moved into her position at the point of the fleet, ahead of everything, the way she had been at Kareth, first into it, last to leave. Around her, 90 ships turned their prows toward the Thessa waypoint. 12 hours. She spent 10 of them at the tactical table, not sleeping, not eating much, looking at the Veil formation data and looking at her own fleet's capabilities, and looking at the numbers, and looking past the numbers at the thing underneath them, the thing that numbers describe but don't contain. 130 ships. They had learned something in 41 days of silence. They had been afraid, and they had used the fear to think rather than run from it, and that made them more dangerous than they had been at Kareth, not less. But they had also never faced 90 ships, 20 of them allied species who had watched the Harbinger at Kareth, and decided that fear was a choice they did not have to keep making. The Harbinger was still flying. That was still true. In the 12th hour, she slept for 90 minutes in the chair at the tactical table. Park, who had been watching her not sleep for hours, let her. He took the watch and looked at the display and at the approaching waypoint and at the fleet behind them, and tried, as he often did, to calculate the odds. He had learned, over 4 years, that the odds were always wrong when Captain Voss was involved. Not because she was lucky. Because she fought like losing was something that happened to other people, in other contexts, in a version of events she was not personally participating in. The Veil had 130 ships. Park looked at the point position. The Harbinger. Ahead of everything, proud toward the enemy. The Veil had never lost. He thought about Athen's fleet scattering at Kareth, 21 ships down. The word retreat in an official Veil record for the first time in 3 centuries. The Veil had never lost. Until they had. He kept the watch and let the captain sleep, and the fleet moved through the dark, and ahead of it all the Harbinger. Flew point, scar-bright hull catching starlight, steady as the thing it had always been, a ship built to take punishment and keep moving, crewed by the species that had been practicing not stopping for 6,000 years. The Thessa waypoint waited. 130 Veil ships waited. The real war had not started yet. It was about to. The Veil were ready. That was the first thing the Harbingers Sensors told Voss when they dropped out of FTL at the Thessa waypoint, and the tactical display resolved from transit blur into something real and specific and very large. 130 ships, arranged in a formation she had not seen before. Not the standard Veil approach column, not the spread attack pattern from Karath. Something new. 3 layers, staggered, with the capital ships buried in the second tier behind a screen of cruisers, and the flanks anchored by fast attack groups that sat at angles suggesting they were intended to curl around an incoming force. They had spent 41 days on that formation. It was good. Voss looked at it for 30 seconds and understood why it was good. The screen ate incoming fire before it reached the capitals. The flanks closed behind anything that broke through. The second tier had clear firing lanes over the screen without exposing themselves. It was a formation built by people who had studied what she'd done at Karath, and built a specific answer to it. They've done their homework, Park said. Yes. That's a real formation. That's not their standard doctrine. No. Behind the Harbinger. The human fleet was completing its FTL transition. 70 ships plus 20 allied vessels, arriving in formation, sensors coming live, weapons charging. The Titan-class ships. UES Unconquered and UES Meridian were visible on the internal display as contacts that were difficult to look at directly, because the energy readings were large enough that the display used a different scale for them than everything else. High Admiral Chen's voice came on the fleet channel. All ships. Formation Kestrel. Harbinger. Sets the pace. Formation Kestrel. Voss had been in the planning sessions for it. Chen had built it in 6 days aboard the fleet carrier Adamant. Using the Karath engagement data and the Titan-class capabilities, and the allied ship specs, and had come out of those 6 days with something that she said, with typical economy, should be interesting. It was a spear. The Harbinger. At the tip, the Titan-class ships directly behind, offset to either side, like shoulders. The carrier groups and battleship divisions forming the shaft. The allied ships split between the flanks, the Karathi and their deep red ships among them, smaller, older, rebuilt in 38 days, flying anyway. The spear pointed at the center of the Veil formation. Voss looked at the Veil formation on her display, at the buried capital ships, at the flanks waiting to close. She looked at the Titan-class contacts. Admiral Chen, she said on the command channel. Voss. Their capitals are in the second tier. Standard approach gets us through the screen and into a crossfire before we reach the command ships. I know. The Titan class can reach the second tier from current range. A pause. Also know. If you fire now before we close, you hit the capitals while the screen is still focused forward. The screen can't rotate fast enough to protect against fire from that range at that angle. Another pause. Longer. That's not in Formation Kestrel. No, Voss said, but it works better. She could hear Chen thinking. It sounded like silence, but it was a specific kind of silence, the kind that means a person is moving things around in their head and checking the result from different angles. You're asking me to deviate from a 6-day plan in the first 30 seconds. I'm telling you their formation has a hole in it, and the Titan class can put something through that hole before they adjust. Another beat. If I fire the Titans now and they don't break the second tier, we've shown them what the Titans can do and they adjust. If you don't fire the Titans now, we fight through that screen and into a crossfire that's going to cost us ships we don't have to lose. Voss kept her voice flat, not arguing, presenting. Their formation assumes we come straight in and hit the screen first. They planned for what I did at Karath. Take the hits, push through. They're planning to make the push-through cost more than it did at Karath. Silence. Unconquered, Meridian. Chen said, weapons free, second-tier targets, fire at will. The Titan-class ships fired. The Titan Harbingers. Crew felt it before they saw it. A vibration through the hull, transmitted through the fleet formation, the displacement of an enormous amount of energy at close range. On the tactical display, the Titan-class weapon signatures were a different color than everything else on the display, a designation the tactical software used when existing categories were insufficient. The rounds crossed the distance to the Veil's second tier in 11 seconds. The Veil screen had not been designed to stop fire coming from that angle at that range. It was facing the wrong way. The second-tier capital ships had their shields oriented forward, toward the expected threat axis. Fire from a different angle, at a range that should not have been achievable, found shields that were not positioned to receive it. 3 capital ships in the second tier lost shields in the first salvo. One of them broke apart. On the Veil command vessel, Fleet Commander Athan watched his formation take fire from a range and angle he had not calculated for, and understood immediately that something in his intelligence about human capabilities had been wrong. The Titan-class ships were not in any existing database. He had read the mass readings from the Scout's last transmission and thought he understood what they meant. He had not understood what they meant. Formation shift, he said. Rotate the screen. Capitals move to. He was already running the geometry in his head. The screen needed to face 2 threat axes now, which meant it needed to split, which meant the center thinned, which meant the spear point coming straight at him had less to push through. His tactical officer said, "Fleet Commander, if we rotate the screen the center." "I know," Athan said. "Do it." Because the alternative was taking Titan-class fire on unshielded capital ships, and the alternative was not acceptable. The screen rotated. The center thinned. The Harbinger accelerated. Voss felt the formation shift on her display before she consciously processed it. The Veil screen pulling apart. Cruisers swinging to face the new threat axis. The center opening up like a question becoming an answer. "Full military power," she said. "All weapons. We go through now." The Harbinger went. Behind her, the human fleet moved, not the careful, managed acceleration of a force trying to preserve itself, but the committed, full-burn push of people who have decided that the time for being careful is finished. The battleship divisions came up to speed. The carrier groups launched fighters. The destroyers on the flanks burned hard to get around the Veil screen's rotating elements before they could reposition. And on the flanks, the Allied ships moved. The Cathosi and Vitharan vessels were good ships, well handled. Their crews experienced in the kind of fleet action their own military histories had given them. They did what Chen's plan asked, took the outer flanks, engaged the Veil fast attack groups that were meant to curl around an incoming force, kept them from curling. The Karathi ships, in their arterial red, did something the plan had not specifically asked for. They went for the Veil command vessel. 12 rebuilt ships, old and small by any serious military metric, driving at the center of the Veil formation on a heading that put them in the firing arcs of 6 Veil cruisers simultaneously. Commander Sath, watching the engagement data from the Karathi flagship, had looked at the tactical picture and done the same math Voss had done at Karath, the math that ends not with what is survivable, but with what matters, and the command vessel mattered. "They're going for the command ship," Park said, watching the Karathi contacts on the display. "I see it. They're going to take heavy casualties on that approach." "I know." Voss watched the Karathi contacts pushing through fire. One went dark, then another. 10 ships, then 9. It changes his calculation. How? Because now he has 3 problems at once. The Harbinger, through his center, the Titans on his second tier, and 12 Karathi ships that are very specifically his problem coming at him personally. She looked at the display. He can't concentrate against all 3. Something has to give. Something gave. Athan looked at the tactical picture, and for the first time in 20 years of fleet command, he could not see the shape of the battle from where he was standing. At Karath, there had been one problem. One human ship, inexplicable, absorbing fire, doing the impossible. One problem, enormous, but one. You could look at one problem from all sides. This was not one problem. This was the Harbinger. Through his center, pushing through the thin screen and firing at everything in reach. This was 2 Titan-class weapon signatures, lighting up his second tier again. A second salvo, finding 2 more capital ships, whose shields had been reoriented, and therefore had new gaps. This was 9 Karathi ships in red, down from 12 but still coming, still burning at him specifically. close enough now that his command vessel's point defense was engaging them. And behind the sea, Harbinger. The full weight of 70 human ships was following through the hole she was making. He looked at his tactical officer. He looked at his second officer. He looked at the display. He thought about the thing he had written in his assessment. A force fighting to not stop can only be exhausted, and exhausting a human military force within a single battle may not be a realistic goal. He had written that. He had believed it when he wrote it. He had not, until this moment, felt it. Concentrate fire on the Harbinger, he said, because it was the ship that had done this before, the ship that was doing it again, the ship that had come back at Kareth after absorbing damage that should have been terminal. If you could remove the Harbinger, specifically, personally, maybe the formation collapsed behind it. Maybe. Every available Veil weapon turned on the throne. Harbinger. The hits were different this time. At Kareth, the Veil had been surprised. Their fire had been good but not coordinated, not focused, not pointed with the specific intention of removing one particular ship. This was coordinated. This was focused. This was the entire attention of a fleet applied to a single target with the explicit goal of making it stop. The Harbinger shook. Not the combat shudder of hits absorbed and distributed. Something deeper. Something that moved through the whole ship at once, like a hand grabbing the hull and squeezing. Deck plating shifted in the port corridor section, and emergency systems slammed down. A weapons battery went out, then another. The shield readings dropped so fast the display couldn't update them in real time. Forward shields gone, said the shield officer, and then the console in front of her exploded, not violently, but with enough force to knock her sideways out of her seat, and Park was at her side before she hit the deck. Drive status, Voss said. Main drive's at 60%. Second drive is fluctuating. Keep it running. Captain, the second drive has a temperature reading that... Keep it running. Another hit, then two simultaneously, close enough together that they registered as one impact, but the damage was in two places. The tactical display reported both before sections of the tactical display went dark. Voss looked at what was left. The Harbinger was still in the center of the Veil formation, through the screen, surrounded, taking fire that would have ended the engagement decisively at any earlier point in her history. She was still firing. Battery 4 was down. Battery 7 was down. The others were still going. The torpedo tubes were cycling. The railgun crews on manual, because the targeting computer was operating at 40%, were doing something that would have been impossible in any training simulation, which is to say, they were doing it in actual combat, finding targets visually and by gut, and by the particular instinct that develops in people who have been doing something long enough that the skill is below the level of thought. Park came back to the tactical table with a cut on his forehead and blood on his collar. He looked at the display. He looked at the captain. He did not say what the display showed because the captain could see the display. How much more can she take? He said. Voss looked at the display, at the damage reports, at the remaining weapons, at the drive readings, at the Veil fire still coming in. She thought about the question honestly. Enough, she said. Fleet Commander Athan saw the Harbinger take fire that would have destroyed any ship he had ever fought, and stay in his formation and keep firing. He saw it, and he understood something. Not a tactical thing, a deeper thing. The thing underneath the tactical thing that the tactical thing had been built on top of, the foundational understanding that all of his doctrine and all of his experience and 300 years of Veil military history had been constructed on, the understanding that there was a point at which any enemy reached its limit, the point at which pain became too much or damage became too great, or the calculation became too clear, and the enemy stopped. Every enemy stopped. It was not an assumption he had examined. It was a thing he had known, the way you know the floor is beneath your feet. Not a belief, just a fact of the world, present and confirmed and unquestioned, because it had never needed to be questioned. The Harbinger was not stopping. It was damaged in ways that should have stopped it 3 times over, and it was still in his formation, and it was still firing, and behind it, 70 more human ships were following through the hole it had made, and his formation was— he looked at the display. His formation was failing. The second tier had lost 4 capitals to the Titan fire. The screen was split, and the Allied ships on the flanks were holding his fast attack groups away from the human flanks. The Karathi ships, 8 of them now, were close enough to his command vessel that his point defense was running hot. He had 130 ships. He had started this engagement with 130 ships. He did not know, currently, how many he would finish it with. He could not see the end of it from where he stood. He had never not been able to see the end of an engagement. He looked at the Harbinger on his display. Concentrated fire of an entire fleet. Still there, still moving, still firing. He thought about what he had written. A force fighting to not stop. He opened a channel. His voice was steady. 20 years of command, and his voice was steady. All ships, he said, withdraw. They broke. Not all at once, not cleanly. Nothing in the engagement had been clean. But the withdrawal order moved through the Vale fleet, and the Vale fleet, unlike at Karath where individual commanders had broken before the order came, executed it with discipline, falling back in sequence, the screen covering the capital ships, the fast attack groups disengaging from the Allied flanks. Professional, controlled. A retreat, but a Vale retreat, which meant it was done well even while it was being done. Athen's command vessel was the last to go. He watched the engagement data until his ship completed the FTL spin-up. He watched the Harbinger. Still in the middle of where his formation had been, surrounded by the human fleet, weapons still cycling on targets that were withdrawing beyond range. He watched the Karathi ships in their red, battered, some of them venting atmosphere, still flying. He watched it, until the FTL transition took the display away, and replaced it with the nothing of transit. He sat in his command chair. He had 41 ships left. Of the 130 he had assembled, after 41 days of preparation, after the new formation and the new doctrine, and everything they had built specifically to counter what they had seen at Karath. 41 ships. He had gone from 43 to 42 at Karath. He had gone from 130 to 41 at Thessa. He sat with that for a long time. The Harbinger was not flying under her own power. She was moving, drifting, on residual momentum, and a third drive that had survived the engagement at low output. But the main drives were down, had gone down in the last minutes of the engagement, when the second drive's temperature readings had crossed from alarming into something past alarming. Chief Okafor had shut them down herself, from the engineering compartment, with the specific authority of someone who knows their ship better than anyone, and has decided that the ship needs to stop now. She was not broken, not entirely, but she was done moving under her own power for a while. On the bridge, Voss stood at the tactical table, the parts of it that were still functional, and looked at the engagement data, at the Vale contacts in full withdrawal, at the fleet around her, at the Allied ship positions. All fleet, Chen's voice came through, clear, on the command channel. Stand down from combat posture. Begin damage assessment and recovery operations. A pause. Well done. Voss looked at the display, at the space where 130 Vale ships had been. Park came to stand beside her. His head wound had been looked at by one of the medical crew and dressed with the materials available, which were not extensive, and the dressing had the improvised quality of something done quickly by someone with other things to do. He looked at the display. They won't be back, he said. Not soon. No. Voss thought about Athen, about the man who had written that assessment, who had understood what he was facing well enough to write it down and still come back with 130 ships, because the alternative was acknowledging something his entire world was not built to accommodate. Not soon. What happens now? What happened now was the easy part, and also the hard part. The Vale would retreat to their core systems. The Chorus would have the mid-rim back. The absorbed species, the Dranathi, the Solvari, all of them, would have a situation that was not the same as it had been, and was not yet what it would become. There would be negotiations, eventually. There would be a long and complicated political process that would take years, and require people far more suited to it than Alara Voss. There would also be the 14 crew members from Karath. and the people from Thessa, and the Karathi who had gone to Sath. That was also what happened now. Politics, Voss said. Diplomacy. Ambassador Oren's problem. She looked at the display one more time. Ours is getting this ship to a dock. Park looked at the Harbinger's damage report on his console. The list was long. It was, if you read it item by item, not a list that described a ship that was flying, but the ship was flying, slowly, without main drives, trailing 2 different fluids that Chief Okafor had been notified about and had added to the list of things to be addressed. She held, he said. She held, Voss agreed. Around them, the crew moved, doing the work of after, the accounting, the repair, the careful, honest assessment of what had been lost and what remained. It was quiet work, not solemn exactly. Something more functional than solemn, the particular mode of people who have been through something and are now on the other side of it, and understand that the other side of it still requires them to do things. Somewhere in the lower decks, someone laughed, a short sound, surprised out of them. Then someone else said something and there was more of it, and Voss did not look toward it, but she heard it, and she let it be what it was. The Harbinger drifted through the aftermath of Thessa Waypoint, and the stars did not know what had happened here, but the ships did, and the crews did, and in the days that followed, the story moved outward through every channel available to every species in the mid-rim, the chorus transmission networks, the independent relay stations, the trade routes, the long, slow word of mouth that moves through interstellar space, the way all important things move, slower than light, but arriving eventually everywhere. The story was simple. The Veil had come. The Veil had never lost. The Veil had been ready. This time, 130 ships, new formation, new doctrine. Everything they had learned applied. One human battleship had gone first. The fleet had followed. The Veil had lost. Not eventually. Not after a long campaign. Not after years of grinding attrition by a force that didn't know when to stop. Here. Now. Once. And the species that had spent 300 years watching the Veil move through the galaxy like a tide that had no reason to turn. They read the transmission data, and they watched the engagement records, and they saw the Harbinger on the display taking fire that should have ended it, and staying, and they felt something shift, not just in their understanding of who could beat the Veil, in their understanding of why. Because the Harbinger, it was not special. It was old and ugly, and had a hole in the hull that maintenance had been meaning to get to, and then had not gotten to, and then had gotten to, and then there was a new hole somewhere else. It was a ship, a human ship. There were a lot of human ships. And behind the ships were the humans, 6,000 years of them, 6,000 years of fighting each other and everyone else, and losing and getting up and fighting again, until the getting up was the deepest thing in them, deeper than training, deeper than doctrine, deeper than the rational calculation of odds. The galaxy had its greatest warriors. It had always had them. It had just not needed them yet. 6 weeks after Thessa Waypoint, in a hospital bay on Karath Station, a Veil prisoner, one of 11 recovered from a disabled cruiser, asked the human medical officer treating him a question. He asked it in the careful, uncertain way of someone using a language not their own. His translator was damaged and some of the words came through approximate rather than exact. But the question was clear enough. Why, he said, do you not stop? The medical officer was a young man named Specialist Davi Osei, who was 24 years old and had been in the Harbinger's medical bay through both engagements and had spent the last 6 weeks treating wounds and writing letters and doing the difficult patient work of after. He was not a philosopher. He was not a historian. He had not been asked this question before, and he thought about it for a moment, the way you think about something you know, but have never put into words, because the words were never required. We've tried stopping, he said. It doesn't suit us. He went back to work. The Veil prisoner lay in his bunk and looked at the ceiling and thought about that for a long time. Outside, the Harbinger sat in dock, being put back together. Again,